Hey everyone, I'm back, and today we're going to be talking about The Mummy. And this movie came out in 1999, and it's directed by Stephen Sommers, if I pronounced that correctly, starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz, who I forgot was in this movie. And whenever I think of this movie, I always know that Brendan Fraser is in it, but I always forget that Rachel Weisz is in it. I don't know why. And I have seen this movie before, and it was a film that I remembered liking. And I think I've seen it at least a few times. I don't know how many times. At least once. I remember the first time I watched it, I was kind of horrified of it at points because at the time when I was like really young, which was like 2006 is probably when I would have watched it for the first time. I liked the characters, I liked the story, and I was horrified by the mummy character, and just like imagining all these horrific things happening to me, possibly. And I remember it being effective for me. But rewatching this movie now, overall, I thought it was fine. I wasn't offended by it. I didn't hate it. I just thought, okay, there are good things about it, but there isn't really anything special. And I thought Brendan Fraser did a good job in this movie. And Rachel Weisz I also liked, even if she doesn't really have much to do other than to dump out exposition. And I did like the cheesy tone of the movie that made it entertaining for me. Honestly, if it was taking itself very seriously with like nothing cheesy or comedic about it, then I would have disliked the movie a lot more. So that cheesy tone was keeping me going throughout most of it. As much as I enjoyed Brendan Fraser in this movie and found him to be entertaining, I did get the impression that he was trying to imitate Brad Pitt or Harrison Ford. And I'll get into that later, but that's kind of how I felt about him at points. And there were things that this movie did well enough for me when it came to the characters and establishing what they want and why they exist in this film. I thought the movie did it well enough. Like, I can give a pass for it, even if it is on the nose. I didn't think it was terrible, at the very least. Same thing with the plot and the stakes. You just get it. It's not anything amazing, but still, it's done simply, and it's nothing complicated, and you can understand it well. And I also enjoyed the practical action when it was in-camera stuff going on and not CG stuff, because the visual effects didn't really hold up in this movie. Although, I will give it a little bit of credit. I did like what they were going for. It was kind of creative and fun. Like, not necessarily something you would see today, mostly because of our understanding of visual effects and what limitations we have now versus back then, like what our understanding of how far visual effects can take us. Like, it was very different back then, and to seeing where we've come 25 years later, it's just very interesting to me. And there's also like a decent amount to appreciate about the film. Like, most of the movie is not in a green screen warehouse, and you can tell that they're putting in effort to make a competent film, and the film is competent, I'll give it that much. But overall, what really dragged this movie down is everything else. I didn't think that this movie was really that interesting to look at. It was kind of just boringly shot for the most part. There were no shots that really stood out as like memorable. And there were some plot holes in this movie, like why did they put a curse on the main villain if eventually if he gets unburied, which is probably going to happen. If he's going to get unburied at some point, possibly, why would you make it so easy for him to have so much power? Like, that's kind of weird. You can just kill him. And there were some really odd sound design choices in this movie. And the biggest one that stood out to me was one that happened in the beginning of the film. And it's kind of a detached action scene. And I'll get into that later. But there was a detached action scene in the beginning of the film, within the first 10 minutes, where a character throws a machete at another guy, and the sound effect for that was so loud and obnoxious and just, what are we doing? Like, whoa. the reason it stood out to me is not just that on its own, but also it was louder than all of the gun firing sound effects, which I found to be very odd. The music in the movie didn't really add anything to my experience. I just found it to be okay. That's there, but it doesn't really add to my overall enjoyment of the film. Also, in this movie, it's kind of iconic, these bug things that just eat you alive. I don't really understand how they work because I get that they eat you and kill you slowly and painfully. However, what I don't understand is how did they survive for 3,000 years just sitting still, not moving at all? Like, how does any of this work? Like, how did they live for over 3,000 years? Do they eat while they're frozen? I don't know. And what really surprised me about this movie is that there's a decent amount of jump scares in this movie for absolutely no reason. And every single time we get a jump scare, it's just annoying and doesn't need to be there. And it's very manipulative also. It's just added in sounds coming independently from the film's universe. It's just like, why are we doing this? And I didn't feel this throughout the entirety of the film, but there were points in this movie that just made me think this is kind of a worse version of an Indiana Jones movie. It's just very derivative of that, and everything that I could get out of this movie, I can just get out of an Indiana Jones movie, or at least the first three. Like the detached action scene in the beginning of the movie to the ending and everything that's being explored there and the adventure all just reminded me of Indiana Jones. And I believe this movie is set in 1925, which I didn't realize until I looked it up, and maybe I missed a subtitle or something, or I just blinked. I don't know. But I guess that's my fault and not the movie's fault. And I do want to mention just a couple tiny things about the film. They literally have a book in this movie that they just call the Book of the Dead. And I don't know, maybe that's just what any movie can call any book because it's just public domain or something. I have no idea. But all I kept thinking whenever they said the Book of the Dead was the Evil Dead. And I was like, really? We're just doing the Book of the Dead? Okay, sure. Fun fact for those of you who don't know, the original title for The Evil Dead was supposed to be Book of the Dead, or was it The Book of the Dead? I'm not too sure, but eventually it turned into The Evil Dead. And with this movie being called The Mummy, and you're probably expecting a mummy to be terrorizing all these different characters, that happens, and the mummy is brought into the movie's plot halfway through the movie. So just be prepared for that. I was like, really? We're just waiting until like the second half of the movie to have the mummy be terrorizing people? That's how long we're going to have to be forced to wait. Like the movie's called The Mummy. You want to see the mummy, and you do. But he kind of shows up a lot later than you might expect. Not saying that as a negative, despite the way I just said all these things, but it's just kind of an odd choice, I feel. And that's about all I have to say about The Mummy from 1999. It was fine. It was a bit nostalgic for me. There's some dated elements for sure. There's a lot of issues that I have with it, but I enjoyed it enough. It's kind of just a movie where, like, yeah, you can just have it on and not be offended by it. But it's just a worse version of Indiana Jones. I wouldn't say ripoff, I would just say derivative, because I wouldn't call this necessarily a ripoff of Indiana Jones, simply because I feel as though there's enough about it that makes it its own thing, that it's just not a carbon copy of Indiana Jones. So if you want to check this movie out, go right ahead. It's not, the most boring thing ever, but I just wish that it was better. So with all that being said, I'm going to give The Mummy from 1999 a 5 out of 10. Thank you for watching my videos. As always, if you enjoyed this review, be sure to leave a like and comment down below you thought of The Mummy from 1999. And my social media links, they will all be in the description, so follow me there. And last but not least, subscribe to be a part of Foley Nation, and I'll see you when I get my next review up, and that is going to be for The Mummy Returns. So look forward to that, but until I get that up, Thank you for watching and have a great day.